as well. Potential for sales tax uncertainty. Obviously, with the state of the economy being as uncertain as it is due to the pandemic, we just don't know what's going to happen with sales tax. We are seeing pretty good numbers in sales tax right now. However, I do believe a lot of that's driven off of home construction in the county. So overall, economists seem to be pretty optimistic about growth potential for North Carolina next year. The expectations for the economy are to kind of get back to normal once the vaccines roll out. Expectations for interest rates are to remain constant for the rest of 2021. However, 22 kind of maybe bring additional changes due to fiscal policy changes with the new administration and recovery. Obviously, if the recovery takes hold and the economy that starts to recover, you will probably see an increase in interest rates. Now, I don't think it's going to be everything I've seen. Doesn't show it to be a drastic jump. It'll obviously start out kind of slow and then creep up. But the yield curve right now has it for the next year staying pretty flat. For general knowledge, I always like to give everybody a little understanding of what 1 cent on the tax rate does. It creates $79,000 for every penny on the tax rate. The CPI for last 12 months was 1.4%. A consumer price index, basically, also many people consider that to be a measure of the rate of inflation. And that's according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The inflation rate projection for the rest of 2021 is expected to be 2.24%, and that's according to Statista. So as I mentioned earlier briefly, home sales are a large portion of our sales and use tax that we receive. And I feel like this is that and the stimulus package. So the expendable cash that people wouldn't normally have, or why we're kind of on target or ahead of target for our sales and use tax for the year. But you'll see that it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, big corporations seem to be doing okay currently, while you see kind of the mom and pop shops are probably hurting more so than the big corporations. Hopefully we can get the vaccine rolled out soon and a lot of these smaller establishments can be visited by our citizens. I talked to our healthcare broker and discussed healthcare estimates for next year coming out. Currently, the estimate that was given to me was 5 to 9% range for town employees. That he's saying that's what the market's showing right now. However, I do understand that there's an executive order scheduled for Thursday involving healthcare. I haven't heard the details of that executive order, and I don't know if that'll affect us this year or not. But I would expect to see some changes in healthcare costs as time progresses. And that's all I have for tonight. I stand by for any questions. Be glad to answer any that you may have.
Anthony, what is the number of building permits issued this year so far?
Did you hear that, Anthony?
I think he asked how many building permits have been issued so far this year.
You gave for 2020, 19 and 20, but you didn't give how many so far this year.
So far in 2021, I would have to ask Brian or Stephen or Mike. I'm not.
Brian's the only one with us this evening, but we can get that out to you.
Just curious. That's a big drop.
Yeah, it's certainly. Sorry.
The inventory of available lots decreased dramatically, and I think that's large in part why you're seeing a lower number. I don't know if, Brian, you want to speak to anything additionally on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a handful of new single-family home permits this year, just zoning permits, so they haven't necessarily gotten building permits yet. I think we've got maybe 5 or 6 at this point in January. But as Terry just mentioned, we've got two final plats coming your way with Eli's Ridge and Villa Grande, which are going to put about, I think in the neighborhood of 90 to 100 lots on the ground. So that'll increase our ability to get those permits issued, obviously, a lot faster rate.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Folks, I think what we wanted to do was pick up basically from last year's vision setting and just sort of try to continue along the same conservative path that we tried to utilize last year. As you can see, we have a lot of projects on the table, trying to pick up a lot of additional things on top of the laundry list that we have, and I don't think they were listed in any specific order other than to try to take into account what we've heard council say is of critical importance, is the way we're trying to approach it. We anticipate a conservative budget process. However, we've got some big ticket items that we've got to pay for that are currently coming. So we're going to have some hard discussions about how those big ticket items are funded and in what way they're funded. So what we wanted to do, normally I would have a presentation, but I felt like it was pertinent, and I would suggest we can get as detailed as you want to get about these items prior to our budget process starting. And we can certainly recess, go as long as you want to tonight, recess and come back at a later night, which would be our suggestion if you want to get real detailed, which you're going to have to on a couple of these items. But we would like to start by trying to give a good specific overview on our sewer projects and where we are, the rates as they currently stand, and then the projects that have yet to be undertaken and how, a reminder, if you will, of how they'll affect the rate structure. That's not to say that we don't have those same issues in other departments, but obviously sewer, we've got several simultaneous projects ongoing that are going to be pretty massive in size, both, in terms of linear feet of pipe and the actual construction, and also the dollars that we have to spend towards that. So that's sort of an overview really quickly. Does anybody else have any questions for Anthony's State of the Budget presentation?
Yes, I have one. When is the year that we're supposed to start taking over the fire department, their salary and their health benefits and all, totally by the town?
If I'm not mistaken, go ahead, Anthony.
I was going to say the interesting thing about the timing of the federal budget and the local town of Winterville budget, state of North Carolina budgets, we adopt different fiscal years, so they kind of overlap a little bit. What you'll have is a tapering effect where we have a final year. The final year will be a partial year. So it's not like we're going to have a one whole year right out of the gate without it. But we will have that through next year.
So if I'm not mistaken, our grant cycle starts in February. Is that right? In terms of
we're moving in
the reporting period.
Yes, we're getting ready to move into the last year.
Correct. So the last year will start this coming month and go through February of 2022. And so that will be interesting from a budgetary perspective, because that first year will actually span we will have almost a mid-budget effect of that. Does that make sense, Councilman Moy?
Yes, I was surprised that it was not it's not placed on our. Well, speaking of next year, though, I was thinking that it should have been placed on the unfunded high priority, but we are speaking up for 2021. So, but this right here that I'm speaking of, it would end in 2022 in February. So by the time we do a budget for the following year, that's when we start looking at that situation as a high priority.
Well,
Is that correct?
it is listed in the considerations for next year, so it's almost more than an unfunded high priority. It is an absolute gotta happen. So that's why you see it in considerations for next year, because we absolutely unequivocally have to start planning for that segue into us totally funding it. We're partially funding it now, so it's not an unfunded high priority. It's a partially funded, gotta happen.
We have it under the unfunded commitment. We've committed to that funding. We've committed to that project, but
Right.
we'll have to find the funding for it as we move forward.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So if council agrees with sort of the direction that staff is trying to take the meeting, we're certainly open to any changes if council has it. I think I'd like to thank Anthony for that excellent introduction into dollars and cents and projects, and ask Ben to now give us an update on our sewer projects and where we are and where we're going.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's good to see y'all. Hope y'all can stay awake after that nice meal through this riveting subject matter. So, with regard to sewer, we have currently two projects underway, two large rehab projects. If you recall, one is the gravity rehab project that the contractor is actually mobilizing, and you may see them showing up sometime this week. They'll start doing some cleaning work and camera work on the lines throughout town. That is the large 3.7 and some change $1 million project that we received funding from the state. That's a $500,000 principal forgiveness, and the remaining balance is at 0% interest over 20 years. Council took the initiative last budget workshop this time last year to get out in front of and adjust rates accordingly to be in position to start making debt service payment on that loan. So thank you for that action. The second project, now that project will be rehabbing manholes and the lines through town to try to eliminate inflow and infiltration into the system, which is good housekeeping practice. It fixes the leaks, therefore it return on that investment prolongs the need for downstream expansion, say at the treatment plant. If we can tighten up our system and keep rainwater from flowing in, we're not having to treat that downstream. So it saves us money on that side. And we're also not having to pump that, and we are trying to avoid situations during these heavy rainfall events where we get a downpour and everything's trying to get in and the pumps can't keep up. So it's a good housekeeping project. The second.
Ben, do you
Yes,
want to
ma'am.
go over the effect of that project on the rate structure? Just a reminder.
Well, that increase was $3.50 taken last year, and that puts us in position to cover the upcoming debt service payment for that project. On your screen, I provided, and thank you for putting that up there, a kind of a summary of the cost of these projects and the impacts on the rates. Now, I provided this to council. I think we've been looking at this spreadsheet for maybe 2+ years.
Correct.
So it's you should be familiar with it. The second project is the what's listed as 2019 sewer rehab project. However, it's already 2021, and we're going to change these dates. But this is the rehabilitation of some pump stations in town. Some are, one will be completely rebuilt over on Chapman Street, going through a process of getting a site for that construction. There'll be some significant modifications down on the Church Street pump station, putting in a bar screen down there. There'll be some work on the panels at some of these at Robinson Heights, Winterville Crossing. So we've got a handful of stations that are going to have a variety of types of improvements done to them for either efficiency, bringing them up to SCADA, which is communication technology, so we can see what's going on at them, turn them on, turn them off, be able to see them from the operations center, how they're behaving, as well as put in, for instance, bar screen will be put in at the new Chapman Street pump station, as well as the existing Church Street pump station, in an attempt to, this device will take out debris that somehow makes it into the system, so we're not trying to pump it, so it's not jamming up the pumps, and then which winds up taking our guys away from doing one job and having to go down there and clean out these what are flushable but not truly flushable wipes. These things get in there and jam up the pumps and cause a lot of problems. So that project was also funded through the SRF program. It is approximately $1.97 million. We received another $500,000 principal forgiveness, and the remaining balance of that will be also at 0% interest over 20 years. Running those numbers out over that 20-year payment period, we're looking at an annual payment of about $73,700 per year, based on our current residential customer base. To cover that principal payment would be, according to the spreadsheet before you, an increase would be necessary of approximately $1.61 on the bills. Moving on down, project 3A and 3B, they don't have to go, they go together, but they don't have to happen right after the other. However, 3A is necessary for 3B to happen. This is the project that, if you recall, Winterville Crossing is in a low area along one of the drainage laterals for the drainage district. It does not go underwater, but it gets surrounded by water during some of these heavy rainfall events, especially during hurricanes. So accessibility is an issue, but also there's some side benefits from redirecting some of that flow off of that pump station and utilizing the new regional station that we just completed a few years ago. Christ Covenant and ACEs for Autism are going to have to do some sewer improvements in order for them to construct ACEs and do the next phases of Christ Covenant School. In conjunction with their on-site improvements and directing that flow to the new regional pump station located off of Old Tar Road, we are trying to, and we're in position to be able to do this based on some forethought of the regional pump station design. We can direct all of the school and ACES flow to that new station, and if we set the pipes deep enough, we could then take all of the flow from the Winterville Crossing pump station and send that to the new regional station, and then we would be able to abandon the existing Winterville crossing pump station. We've got 28 pump stations in town. So anything we can do to get rid of one, please understand how excited we'd be to be able to do that. What that also does is frees up some flow. That Winterville Crossing pump station pumps up to Old Tar Road at Main Street, and then that flow goes to Forbes Avenue pump station, which then pumps over into a manhole that then gets over eventually to Church Street. We have some issues at Forbes Avenue flow-wise due to some inflow and infiltration. And so anything that we can do to take flow off of Forbes Avenue and redirect it to get it to Church Street without having to do any significant improvements at Forbes Avenue, it's kind of a win-win. We get rid of a pump station, we redirect flow, we don't have to expand and do some major improvements, so it's money well spent. But in order to be able to do that, we have to, along with Christ Covenant and ACES, participate in the size, the appropriate size and the appropriate depth of the gravity line running from their respective sites to our pump station. So that is Project 3A.
Ben, I got a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Eli Ridge, where will its flow go to?
Its flow will go to the same regional pump station, the one on Old Tar Road. So 3A, we need to do that in order to be in position to do 3B. Christ Covenant and ACES are getting, we've had some meetings, we've had meetings all along, and we've had a recent meeting that they are getting closer and closer to being ready to do these improvements in order to make their own site improvements. So to keep that ball rolling along, wanted to talk to y'all tonight. We've had this conversation before, and council seemed supportive. Just want to keep this on your radar and make sure we're all still in agreement of pursuing this type of improvement to be in position to be able to get rid of a pump station. The effect or the impact on rates, should this be covered in that manner, if you see, we had looked at a kind of a payment window of that cost share over 5 years, equaling about $14,000 a year, which has an annual impact of approximately 31 cents on the user rate for that. Combined with the second phase of that effort, which would be the extension of gravity from the common property line with Christ Covenant and ACES, extending that line up to the pump station and performing the abandonment. That estimate was approximately $190,000. Also looked at 5 years financing and paying for that for an annual payment of $40,125, which equates to an 87-cent impact on user rates. The last project on the list, and Councilwoman Robertson brought up Eli's Ridge and that pump station. If you recall, we worked out an agreement with the developer to increase the size, the capacity of the wet well, and be in position to put in larger pumps if and when necessary, to be able to reach and serve with relative ease the area east of Fort Swamp Canal. So that would be from the canal or Eli's Ridge back towards County Home Road. That is within our agreed upon service areas, also on our territorial area with regard to electric that we had worked out and have been targeting and interested in serving as that develops. The cost share for that we were looking at about $93,000 and doing that over 5 years at $18,600 per year with an impact to the user rate of 41 cents. So those are the large projects. A couple of them are on their way. One of them sitting in the gate ready to launch, and the other one is underway, and we'll be looking to kind of make that contribution and payment upon completion, kind of in line with our cost share and reimbursement agreement with the developer of Eli's Ridge. So I'll answer any questions regarding sewer at the moment if you have any.
I believe, Ben, if I did my math correctly, we would need an additional $3.20 in adjustments to the rates to cover projects 2 through 4? 2 through 4?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. To cover the upcoming pump station rehab project, the 2 phases of the Winterville abandonment, Winterville crossing abandonment, and then the Eli's Ridge cost sharing. Yes, ma'am, it would be an additional $3.20.
Anybody have any questions? Yes.
And to do all of the project, that would be an increase of, if I'm looking at this right, $6.71?
Well, in total, but if you notice on item 1, we have already, council already made that increase last year. So that 351's in place. The increase last year was actually $3.50. That 351 is a reflection of the increase to that project, to the gravity rehab project. That's a result of receiving bids recently where they came in higher, slightly higher than estimated, and that we asked for and received the additional funding from the SRF folks.
Okay. And so that's like what Terry was saying. So the difference from that would be about $3, close to $3 and some cent. Is that
$3.20. Yes, sir. With regard to the timing of when these payments would be due, we think that the pump station rehab project may come in a fiscal year later than we were anticipating if you had asked us last year, due to one, the gravity rehab project was delayed due to permit review at the state level. And then there has been some delays with regard to the pump station project related to property acquisition for the pump station site. So just working through that and then just working on the design of that rehab project, we think it may be one fiscal year later that payment will become due.
Any questions?
All right, that was sewer.
All right, give me 1 second. Thinking now we're going to talk about stormwater and
If I could
Yeah.
I just touch on water real quick? I
Yeah.
don't have any slides for water, but while we're in the wet utility, the sewer side of things, I want to just talk about water. We are in really good shape when it comes to the water system and the projects we've done recently. The elevated tank rehab project, we did the interconnect project on Worthington Road and that 10-inch line into town that has helped us from a supply and a all sorts of ways with the water system. We had in the hopper last year a funding application that was denied due to lack of funding and just some interpretation of the intent of the project. But we will continue to modify our application and keep asking for some funding assistance in that regard. But that project was to complete some hydraulic loops that would improve, not that we're having an issue with, but we always like to reduce as much water age in the system in some of these radial lines that just kind of have dead ends. It would help us from having to, it would eliminate or reduce the time that staff has to go out and open hydrants and flush out these dead end lines. It'll just move the water through the system a lot better, as well as increase the hydraulics and just pressures within the system. And then should we have an issue, a water main break, it would allow us, very similar to how Robert likes to be able to backfeed a neighborhood. If a squirrel gets into a section of the street and messes up the power, he can feed it from another direction. We also like to do the water system that way. If we have a break, we want to be able to cut a few valves off and be able to only have to cut off a few folks and not cut off a whole neighborhood. Kind of thing. Now, that project was estimated at $582,000, and like I said, we are seeking funding assistance from the state to cover that cost for that desired improvement project.
Ben, those improvements would also go a long way towards improving some of our worst areas in terms of fire flow, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So we deem that critically important for several reasons.
So if there's any questions on the water side of things, I'll answer those. If not, I can move on to the next item.
Is this where you want to be, Ben?
Can I go to streets? I was going to hit stormwater last.
Let's see. Is that?
If that's okay.
that
That's still stormwater. Streets, I don't think I gave you anything.
yeah, I
there.
don't think you gave me anything either.
Okay.
So go right
So,
ahead.
yeah, we'll talk about, yeah. So, on the street side of things, and it's, Anthony, had a number on one of his slides there during his presentation about the fund balance within the Powellville Fund of, $241,969. And like he said, that's right around our annual appropriation through Powellville. We did a good job of kind of squirreling away some of that money, but then we had to spend quite a big chunk of that reserve just in order to accomplish some major drainage and street projects that we had going on the past couple of years. We just finished a streets project, and we've closed that out, and we're working on final payment, and you'll be seeing a budget amendment to cover some of those costs at the upcoming meeting. But what we're looking at trying to target for this upcoming year is going to be the finishing the rebuilding of Gaylord Street, as well as working on fixing Chapman Street. We pushed off Chapman Street because of the reconstruction of Boyd Street and the recently completed Chapman Street culvert project. We knew there was really no sense in rebuilding the road over there for another contractor to come tear it up and then us have to go back and fix what we just fixed. So we waited. Now those two projects are done, so it'll be time to try to tackle that. Just to give you an idea, the project we finished this past year, we rebuilt Milton Drive, and that means we took out all of the asphalt, dug out all of the muck that was below the asphalt, brought in sand, brought in rock, and then repaved with 2 inches of nice, fresh, smooth asphalt. So we we're looking at during that project, the total rebuild of that street was approximately $170 per linear foot. So that's just based on most recent project, those prices compared to the quantity. So to put in perspective, for Gaylord Street, there's approximately 470 linear feet remaining to be redone, and we had to do the same thing over there that we had to do on Milton Street. We had to tear everything out, dig it all out, haul it off, bring in new good stuff, and rebuild the road. So 470 feet at $170 per foot, you're looking at $80,000 to complete that. Chapman Street, this is worst case scenario, having to do the same thing over there. From Boyd Street to the pump station site is approximately 875 feet. So at that same 170 per linear foot, you're looking at approximately $150,000. So those two locations in that project, just construction is going to be about $230,000. So that falls, and this is what we were thinking last year, that it would fall into that. It's going to take those two sites will eat up all the money that we get. So just wanted to, we had kind of talked about that, but just wanted to remind and just bring that back to the forefront with regard to streets. We're not, in some years we can tackle little things all over town, but in this one we kind of need to finish what we started over on Gaylord and then do a similar rebuild over on Chapman.
And
This is Ms. Robertson.
Yes, ma'am.
Do these estimates take into account, I remember last year when we were talking about doing some streets, once the work started, there was some extra things that needed to be done. Do these two estimates take into account those extra things that had to be done to those areas?
Yes, ma'am. So when I was talking about Chapman, that it's worst case scenario. This is best case scenario is mill the asphalt that's there and put down a nice little layer. You're in and you're out and you're cheap, and it only takes like a day and a half. I have given the worst case scenario for both of these. So yes, ma'am, it takes into account, having to rebuild, having to dig it all out and put back a brand new, properly constructed to today's standards street.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And Mayor and Council, I know there was some recent discussion about Park Road and paving of that. I know that there's been some requests for some state assistance potentially, but clearly that's just to take care of portions of two of our roads that obviously may need some substantial work, but I think it goes without saying that we could definitely take a far bigger pot of money and do some real work to some of the rest of our streets, and that's not including any DOT streets in town. So we're trying to take the worst as we find it and work on those, but yet we've still not come together with a large overall project and ask you all to look at trying to find a way to fund a massive streets project, if that makes sense. So just wanted to make sure that you all are okay with trying to take the couple of worst case scenarios as we find them and work on those with our allotment of Powell bill and move forward. Obviously, that's a slower way to proceed, but obviously we can get in and try to do some of the more extensive work when necessary.
And hope we have a nice cooler winter.
Yes. Correct. And we know that we've got other areas that need to be addressed, but certainly you don't get to do much when you've got to completely rebuild the street. So that's sort of why we continue to take the approach we're taking.
And Terry, thank you. That's a good segue. While we're on streets, I want to just make council remind or make aware, the MPO that we are a member of was able to contract with a company to go out and do a pavement condition assessment on, and so what they've got a fancy truck that's got all these scanners, radars, cameras, picture and taker, GPS stuff on it, that rides along and checks the pavement condition. Now that's just looking at the asphalt on the surface for alligator cracking, potholes, just deficiencies that it can sense right there on the surface. We are in the process, staff in the group with the MPO, we're going through the findings from the company's called Transmap. Transmap did the assessment, has collected the data, created maps, has tables and stuff, and we're going through that data, kind of critiquing it and working towards getting a draft of that final report. But this report and the data and the findings will be used by us and the other entities, but Winterville specifically, in conjunction with our consultant, to try to create, very similar to what we did with the water and sewer system when we did the asset inventory and assessment. We gathered data on all of our inventory of the streets. We now know what the conditions are. Now we can kind of prioritize and schedule out. It's going to wind up being a capital improvement plan for the streets and sidewalks. Is the ultimate goal, to be able to look at the map, kind of have an idea. Now, granted, it's a snapshot of when they rode the roads this past year. So knowing that what may not be which may be listed as a good condition this year may be a poor condition in a few years. So this is a document that will lend itself to be developed and incorporated into an overall streets, sidewalk, curb and gutter type capital improvement plan that gives us an idea of upcoming needs, forecasting, but knowing we'll have to revisit and update it as we find things that change over time.
And I think that would add on to my question that I have. The upgrades that we're speaking of and what we already have done, I think it has been a great need in the community. But for future upgrade, my question is, when does it warrant when you do not have sidewalks on that street? And when do it warrant that you need to place sidewalks into an upgrade street like we just recently done?
Right, with all new development, we're requiring, sidewalks, and depending on what type of street, it may have to be on both sides of the road. We have an old pedestrian plan that identified the gaps that needed to be filled in. We've got some projects that when they occur in developed areas, we are requiring the new development to include a sidewalk. So we may have an infill and then another gap between that new section and some existing stuff, and we'll just try to piece those in. We've been working through that on Mill Street with regard to connecting Main to Boyd Street. We were able to, with the development of the community fire department, they put in a section. We paid for another section to get it to Depot. We've got a gap from Depot to Main, and we got a gap from the fire station down to Boyd, which we've got that application in to the MPO for scoring, and hopefully that'll make it on their list for covering that. Now, with regard to our own internal town maintained streets, that's kind of a function of available funds and safety situations, whether if we've had accidents, if we have pedestrian issues over there, just trying to put them in when and where we can. But like I said, new stuff is required to have it at least on one side of the street.
Ben, my major safety issues are the street in front of the library, the big hole with no insurance, and across from Robinson. Somebody's gonna break their leg. and get hurt.
Yes, sir. So
Came in there big
that's,
time.
that is kind of a street and stormwater issue, and I've got that, that's on my next,
Okay.
item
The safety
of
issue, that's,
conversation.
it's a sewer issue, it's a safety issue, these big holes.
Correct, and we want to talk about what's causing some of those that kind of go hand in hand, so, Ben, you just tell me what you're ready for now.
I think we're ready for, we can go stormwater. If you want to go to the map, that was, on that.
Okay?
So on this map, if you recall, this is a figure that came from the Noble Canal Drainage Basin Study. Now, you've got numerous basins throughout town, but this is the only one that we've really done an in-depth study. That was, remember, cost shared with a Water Resource Development Project grant where we paid a portion or half of the cost of that study that evaluated the entire almost 300-acre drainage basin and identified deficiencies that needed to be fixed with either pipes are too small or they are just falling apart. Now, this is just one basin. We've got similar problems all over town, but I wanted to just bring this one back to council because we've already tackled one section of this, but as Councilman Moore just mentioned, there's one that stares in the face of students, teachers, and parents every day along Railroad Street. The engineer who developed the study broke this map. I don't think that was me.
It's me.
Okay. Broke the map up into 5 sections, and I have jotted down because sometimes it's hard to follow it on there, and they prioritized them 1 through 5, and provided cost estimates with each section, and I've provided those to you, and they're also on the slide. But
Except for section 5, I didn't see a number.
sir.
I didn't.
Oh yeah, that's correct. Section 5, and because that number I didn't want anyone to see it and get confused with it because it's a little. That was to improve the Chapman Street culvert, and we have already taken care of that through the Golden Leaf grant. So that was a portion of Section 5. The red pieces that are along that corridor are the bank stabilization areas that were identified, and that is what we were looking at in the approximately $180,000 range. There, we applied recently to Water Resource Project Development Grant. They denied our funding application for that bank stabilization. So that's, I did not put a number there because that one's not the same number that was in the study that showed up. And that section really is kind of 2 sections now. It's the culvert that we took care of, and now that bank stabilization, those red sections there. The section, Councilman Moore, that you brought up would be section 1, right in front of W.H. Robinson, running from Worthington Street down to Gardner Street. Now we'll have to revisit the estimates because this study was done back in 2017, I believe. But at that time, that project was we've got some undersized concrete pipes along there that are failing one joint at a time, and that's what's leading to the sinkholes in the curb line, the falling in of the curb head, the loss of ground, dirt on the backside of the curb head. And then the loss of capacity in there creates flooding issues as well. So the estimate to fix those issues on just that section of railroad was $1.15 million. So that's one of the big problems from a failing infrastructure and potential safety side of things. Now, if you go down, the second priority would be getting under the railroad, which would be the yellow section, section 2. So that would be reconfiguring, changing kind of how it crosses under the railroad tracks and then gets down past Tyson Street to tie into the existing pipe that's there. And that project is estimated at about $845,000,
Ben, a note, we fixed this section years ago and used all our money from the, we got from the state, and we put the wrong size tile in. Mistake. I'm sure you won't do the same. I remember that big mistake we
That's
made.
correct. That one, it was you had some existing pipes. We put in another pipe. You had an angle. I had an interference box in there. It was I would say it was an adequate job at the time with funds available and the footprint within which they had to work. If you had a blank canvas, it could be done differently and probably have a better impact on. I mean, that's just where the bottleneck is, and that's typically what you have with railroad tracks. Is when you look at how this area of town has developed. I mean, it's all built out for the most part. There's not a single stormwater pond anywhere in that drainage basin. So when it rains, it drains. It doesn't just hold back. So we have to figure out a way to improve the conveyance system, the pipes, in order to get that water effectively out of the streets and down towards Swift Creek. Section 3 would be the west side of Railroad Street, improving some of those failing old pipes, undersized pipes, and that was approximately $818,000. And then Section 4, which is the largest price because it's a significant structure to go in. There's a corrugated metal pipe that runs from Railroad to Mill Street. And if you notice, when you get to Mill Street, if you look back to your left at that pipe, that pipe is what we call turtle backing. I mean, it's exposed out of the ground. So it's a large pipe, but it's not deep enough. So similar to what we did over at Chapman Street, where we took pipes out and we put a prefab or a poured in place, in certain instances, concrete box culvert. That's what the engineer was proposing on that. And that winds up being an expensive project for that. So that's why you're looking at $1.9 million versus the 1.15 is in Section 1. Section 4 has very little curb and gutter and asphalt, but it's got a lot of concrete versus Section 1 that's got a lot of concrete pipe. They're smaller diameter, comparatively speaking, but there's a lot of curb and gutter and asphalt in that project. So they're both unique, they're both expensive, but they're both necessary. But as I said, the engineer, you kind of prioritize them based on need, and that's what we came up with there. So
Safety issue is the biggest issue. You've been
Sir?
The safety issue is the biggest issue.
Correct.
Robinson.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a safety, there's a drainage, there's a failing infrastructure, there's not only the pipe network, but the things that we pay for and install sitting on top of it, which would be the asphalt and the curb and gutter. There's a lot of stuff sitting there that has been looking us in the face and needs to be taken care of. So with with that, I think that's, you know, I mean, I could.
But you didn't say anything about section 5.
Yes, sir. I mean, we talked about that included the culvert that we just finished at $1.2 million. The estimate in that also included the bank stabilization that we applied for the state, and we're just declined the funding for that. And that application was $180,000 for that bank stabilization of the red sections there. So section 5, the portion at Chapman Street has been completed, so we can scratch that portion of section 5 off.
Yes, sir. Okay. So that price is still the same at $180,000.
Well,
From Chapman to Mills.
That is the estimate that was provided by the consultant and used in the funding application to provide some bank stabilization efforts in those highlighted red areas there, excluding the one downstream of Chapman Street. So there's 6 runs there that were included in that estimate of 180.
Is there any way that we could just stabilize maybe the areas that are near houses, that, you know, the banks are, you know, caving in around? I mean, how much would it cost to do 1 or 2 of those areas, especially those corners?
Well, I mean, each one would be, I mean, there's different quantities for each of those. We'd have to kind of go out and do some measuring and everything along there. So they'd be, you know, what you're getting is, you know, some runoff from that field is a couple of those areas. There's the straight shot, some undermining there straight out of Mill Street. You know, if we, as we've always talked about, when you start taking away the rooted vegetation that's already on the bank and then put in loose soil and rocks, then you're going to have erosion within that area, and then it also creates turbulent velocities down from the improvements that then begin to migrate the problem in a downstream direction. So with regard, and I've kind of stated, with regard to ditch stabilization, once you go in, it's like old paint on a plaster wall. Once you start picking at it, you're setting yourself up to repaint the whole wall.
But my problem with it is that we have not been able to get anything done for this area, but yet and still, you know, and I know you get tired of me saying it, over in Magnolia Ridge, you know, we were able to stabilize that area with town forces, and we didn't go through all these things so that a developer could build more houses and, of course, make more profit. But right here in town, we haven't been able to get through to do anything to this area that has been needing some attention. We had to go through the federal government, and we've been through several grants. This study, you know, the study costs just about as much as it would have to done it all, but I understand that you couldn't do the work without the study because the study covers the whole town. But I'm thinking that we could do 1 or 2 sections where there's corners, you know, that we see that the land is eroding in these people's backyards.
Yes, ma'am. The work over in Magnolia Ridge, you know, just this Noble Canal is a named blue line stream on a USGS quad. It's got jurisdictional with regard to the Corps of Engineers and DWQ. That section that was improved or stabilized by town staff was a non-jurisdictional section of that feature. We, in that effort, made the developer on the other side who owned that property slope back the sections that we were requiring of him. So he did that work. We did similar work on our side in areas that we were allowed and were able to access. And so that was, as you were present for some of those conversations there was some erosion going on there, but there was no potential loss of property, structures or a safety situation. There was a velocity issue that was eroding banks prior and tried to get to it before. But we had, there was no work done by staff that benefited the developer on the opposite side of the creek. We actually required him to do some of that work in conjunction with our installation of the riprap.
I still, I'm still saying that this has been in the works a long time. We spent lots and lots of money doing the study. I know that we had to apply to the federal government, but I'm trying to, I still feel like that there should be some areas that are designated. If we would do one a year, we would be able to stop some of the erosion that's occurring right in the areas where houses already stand.
I think, we mentioned before, if directed by council to do so, we will take the effort and budget for and take action in that direction.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think that is all that I had as far as an overview of projects and associated costs. Now, I'm certainly here willing to answer any questions that have come up during that conversation or any that may come up later.
Ben, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
So folks, that covers, in addition to Anthony's presentation, which includes many of the projects that we're currently working on, an overview of where we are with a lot of our large-scale projects and budgetary needs, at least for the upcoming fiscal year and beyond. We're happy to answer any questions that you have, and certainly are willing to prioritize and listen to what you have on your mind tonight.
One of the things that I would like to see, and I think I had addressed it, is going back to these school line string in section 5, the stabilization part of it. We're speaking of $180,000. It will be, I think it would be a great start compared to what we already have done on Chapman Street, and to connect from there and continue on, hopefully get to the end of this problem that we're having, but do a little bit at a time. But if we continue on not doing anything, then the problem is still going to continue on getting worse. I think that we need to look at that section 5, and we're speaking of 180-some thousand the last time that we got a quote, and see can we do some stabilization on that section.
I would like to see us do some stabilization in that area too, at least 1 or 2 sections in the year. And find out the cost of doing some of the sections that, especially the ones that are like corners.
Do we have to have a motion on that, or just something that we're just going to write down on? Terry?
Councilman Moy, I've been saying it, I think, for several meetings now. At some point, council's going to have to vote on this. I think staff's gone about as far as we can go.
I would like to make a motion that we will look at the section 5 and start looking at, see can we start placing the stabilization on that section, and at least start on the path of getting this problem that we have from Chapman Street all the way down in front of W.H. Robinson School. We have a serious problem, and it's not getting any better.
Councilman Moy, I assume you're only referring to the cost associated with Section 5, though, at this point.
Yes, because it is, the estimate at this time is the lowest that we have. The rest of them is pretty much expensive right now. I think that if we start with Section 5, that would be a great start.
Wouldn't you put the safety of the students first? If they're having problems walking in front of the school, this is a big school with the top schools in the county, and you don't put their safety or their parents and children before you do this section? I think you always need to put the kids first and the parents first. A lot of kids attend there. What, 600 some kids go to school there?
I'm not saying, Mr. Moore, I'm not saying that I'm trying to place that area before the school, and I totally agree with you. You're talking about our kids and our parents and the traffic itself. But if you look at the cost of that, you're talking about
I'm looking at 800.
$1.15 million, and we only talking about 180,000 on this other one, and we can't even do that. I just don't understand how we can be able to do 1.1 million.
I don't see $180,000. That was already spent.
Sir?
That section's already been done. Section 5's already been completed.
A part of Section
Part of it,
5.
okay.
The remaining section,
There are no kids walking along that ditch there. The kids walk around to school. I always thought you put the youth first.
Well, that's a good way to look at it, Mr.
Yeah, I always,
Moore.
that's
totally agree with
$818,000.
you.
But anyway, I understand.
I totally agree with you. Our youth come first. That is true. But can we afford it? Can we afford the $1.1 million?
not without borrowing money. You all are very familiar with our stormwater fund as it stands right now, so it is not that robust that we could just pay for it outright. There was a motion made. I did not hear a second.
I would like to make another motion in that, I would like to make a motion that we get staff to look at the cost for doing a few sections of the area from Mill Street to, from Mill Street down towards Chapman Street, as far as a retaining wall, if we could do a couple of sections of that.
Councilwoman Robertson, can I go back to Councilman Moy's motion? I assume that motion died for lack of a second. I did not hear one.
Yes.
Okay, so, Mayor?
Yes, we have one motion from Mr. Moore, and now we got a second motion. We got to vote on the first one first.
Mayor, I don't think we got a second on the first, but I'm going to turn that procedural part over to you.
We never got a second on Mr. Moore's that I heard.
I don't think so.
We never get a second on his motion.
No.
If we don't have a motion, that motion fails. Now, Ms. Robertson, your motion.
I would like to have staff to investigate doing at least two sections of retaining walls or rocks in the section from Mill Street 2 down toward the, new pump station.
Okay, you got your motion. Is there a
Wait.
second?
What? Okay.
I think I heard a second. Did I
I'll
hear a
second that. Yes.
Again,
Okay, all right, discussion.
again,
discussion?
put the safety of the students first. Shouldn't we study the holes along Railroad Street first? Isn't that more of a priority than this area? These are parents and children every
Mr.
day. Shouldn't we make it as safe
Mr.
as
Moore, if
possible?
Mr. Moore, if
know-
you would like to make a motion on that,
No, I'm-
we would be able to vote on that.
Okay.
No one has made a motion as to
Okay,
that
I just
because of
said-
the
I
fact
just-
of the cost.
Just thought it was unusual you didn't put the kids first. That's all.
Well, we have a motion and a second from Ms. Robertson.
Mayor, I have a question before council votes on this. Up to what amount of money is staff supposed to work? I'm a little bit confused as to, out of 180,000, what are we supposed to be striving for to bring back to council?
I would like to see, the cost for putting a retaining wall, retaining wall in the areas, the corners. There's a corner there right from Mill Street that has been losing ground, and the other corner, and the next section where a retaining wall. Start with those 2 sections.
And if
I
Ben,
don't know the cost of those.
Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, we're not talking about a retaining wall.
Well, I'm talking about, what would it be?
Riprap,
Riprap?
right.
It'd be riprap, it'd be stone, yes ma'am, that would be an allowable, impact, and it would not, be allowed to go across the channel of the stream, but, we could, if allowed to, put some stabilization stone along the banks.
And I'll make this statement, I am not against repairing the area down by W.H. Robinson. But when we look at the price of that area down there, there's been we haven't made any motions as to what to do. I know that we need to look at resources to fund that. That's $1.15 million, whereas this whole project is $180,000. And yes, it does need work. I see it every day I go by there. And I do think it's a danger for our students. And I think that it should be high on our priority list.
So we put the cost of this section before we make a motion for the students and staff.
I didn't hear what you said, Mr. Moore.
Okay? I understand.
No, what did Mr. Moore say?
I said, again, we're putting the students and staff behind this section of ditch for $180,000, whatever we spend. I'm gonna make a motion after this one, pass or not,
Well,
to do something about the holes along the, from the W.H. Robinson next. So
I
asked
think if
those
we
to-
had put this as a high priority years ago and seen the need of this in this community, we wouldn't be dealing with it right now. But the needs of this community have been put on back burner for several years, for quite a few years. And it's time that we started doing something so that we don't lose this ground. And also, we talk about economic development. This area has a large piece of land that's not developed. So it would open it up too. But I
know
am
all
not
over
against
town we
it.
have issues that are not correct, caving in. I brought up last year about all people's backyards that caving in and not being fixed at all either. And there's a danger too. The lady showed me, last week, her backyard, I caved in, fenced it off. Been doing it right now, I understand. But I'll vote against this, then I'll make a motion and ask y'all to vote against it, and then make a motion that we just repair the holes along Railroad Street for safety of the students and staff.
If I could say just one thing, this boils down, it sounds like to me, with all the discussion that's going on, it's a project between children's safety and property values. which one do you think is most important, children's safety or property values?
I have no problem with,
That's my opinion.
well, I have no problem with children's safety. And if we were allocating $1.15 million to do it, I have no problem with that. I'm not bouncing these against each other. I'm not bouncing them against each other. I would like to see both of the projects done. But of course, this is a cheaper project. We're not talking about as much money.
Talking about money versus children's safety.
I'm not talking about doing the whole project,
I
1.9
leave
million.
that alone.
Could I call for the question, Mayor?
Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
Councilman, or Mayor Pro Tem Hines has called for the question.
Okay, I didn't know who it was that called for it, but call for the question.
Mayor Pro
All
Tem,
in favor of Ms. Robertson's motion?
Mayor, let me poll the board.
Parker, you handle that.
Okay. I'll start with Mayor Pro Tem Hines,
No.
Councilman Moore,
No,
Councilman Moy,
Yes.
Councilwoman Robertson,
Yes.
and Councilman Smith.
no.
I believe we have 3 against and 2 in favor of the motion, so therefore the motion fails.
Okay,
I'd like to make a
moving
motion,
on to the next item.
Mayor, I think we have another motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we look into the cost of fixing the holes along, in front of W.H. Robinson School and in front of the library. And then we look at what we spend. Let's look at the cost of those 2 areas. The safety of our students and parents who visit the library and the school.
And I will second that.
I was going to say, I'd like to make a substitute to that, to also look at the cost of Section 3. So you get 1, 2, and 3, where you're looking at the east side and the west side
Yes.
of the railroad. Just a cost,
Yes.
that's what I'm saying,
Yes,
make
sir.
a substitute to that. Looking at repairing section, looking at a cost of repairing right in front of W.H. Robinson, then down by the library. Then also on the other side, what would be a cost?
We're just talking about pavement repairs.
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
If that's what you're talking about,
Yes,
that's why I would like
that's-
to substitute to that, to see what the cost would be to repair
All 3 sections.
all 3 sections.
Of railroad.
Of the railroad, right.
Councilwoman Robertson, are you good with that amendment?
I'm fine with it. I have no problem with repairing down by Robinson. I have no problem with repairing those sections of the area by the library. I have no problem with that.
Well, tell me this, I think that, don't he have the approximate cost of section 1, 2, and 3 on this map here?
We're not talking about my understanding is that we're not talking about the total project as presented in the handouts tonight. I think my understanding is to proceed with immediate repairs, if you will, to the large potholes and in these sections, which would be in front of Robinson, in front of the library, and then any that exist on the west side of Railroad Street.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, would that be feasible to do that? I'm asking our engineer.
Well, Mr. Moore, from my perspective, I would like to see a total, what the cost would be. And then we can look at what, Ben, help me out, what he projected, what the cost would be to fix the total thing. Because I think we need to look at, if we can get by first at the repairs, looking at what it's going to be. If the repairs is going to be just as much as the total cost, why would we do the repairs? That's my question.
I think you've got a twofold thing here, and Ben, correct me if I'm wrong. You've got potentially the work it would take to repair the pavement, get it in a situation where it's not an immediate safety issue.
Right.
But then you've got to fix that infrastructure underneath that's causing these holes to continue to surface. That's where the large dollars come in. And we presented
And
it.
that's what, go ahead.
I was
I'm
going to,
sorry.
I just wanted to remind council when we presented the basin study, the whole basin study, that included all 5 sections and the total cost, knowing that we couldn't do it all at one time. That's why we broke it into phases. So obviously, it is something that we know is a large, costly project, but it continues to be an important one. We understand the need to go ahead and try to get some costs to do some immediate, I'll call it patch repair, knowing that those things aren't really long-term solutions to what we're trying to talk about from the broader perspective.
Because we got to figure out how we're going to pay for it.
Correct. And honestly, you know, $6 million, that's a lot of money.
Right.
Ben, I'm sorry if I,
No, ma'am, that's, I agree. We kind of need to look at, once you get down underground and see what you've got. I mean, if you, start replacing a piston here and a piston there and a valve here and a valve there, by the time you're done with little spot repairs, you might as well have just bought a brand new engine and thrown it in.
That's what I was thinking.
Well,
Exactly.
so what we've got is the estimate, and it may be that, based on what's under there, that you wind up doing this, but we can look at all 3 projects. You may wind up economies of scale getting a little bit more if you do the entire section 1 than if you broke that up into small bits and pieces. But at the same time, there may be some funding sources from these, I think SRF also has some stormwater money for these types of projects. That could be, it'd be very similar. I'm not as familiar with utilizing those funds as we have for water and sewer projects, but I can certainly get educated on and consult our consultant on project scope, estimate, and potential funding scenarios and timelines associated with them.
Well, also to Ben and Terry, just ask this question here. Also with the railroad running through there, I'm just asking, is it a possibility with funds from the railroad, maybe, I'm just saying, that they could partner with us because stabilization of the railroad along this area, maybe they will consider looking at this. I'm just saying,
doesn't hurt to ask.
it doesn't hurt to ask. And that's why I'm saying if we can get the cost, and maybe looking at the railroad and asking them, say, look, this is what it's going to cost us. The town, what we can do, what can y'all do to help us? Because the railroad is running through here.
sure.
If this collapse, if the pipes collapse, what's going to happen? The railroad is going to collapse. So, to me, you can ask. And that's why I'm saying getting the figures and having something to present to them, to saying this is what we're looking at from a town perspective. What can you do from the railroad perspective? Even if we have to call in and ask elected officials to step in to help with the, on the federal side of this, to talk with the railroad because it's running through our town.
I certainly don't think it hurts to ask, and certainly there may be some things that we're not aware of. We know it's a big project. So I think, just to recap, I'm hearing sort of a twofold approach. Take a look at some cost for an immediate solution, though it's not a long-term solution. Get these things patched, paved, whatnot, and then maybe look at the larger projects before us in sections 1, 2, and 3 and try to determine what funding help may be out there, number one. Number two, whether there's an opportunity for a partnership with the railroad. And then can we break those up into smaller pieces to try to maybe get started?
Right.
Did I recap that?
It's been portrayed as a safety issue. Are we going to use that as a means for seeking funds because of the safety issue that it poses to the students at Robinson?
I think not only the safety issue to just the students at Robinson, but to people who travel that way every day. So I believe that certainly those reasons are some of the top reasons that we should utilize to try to pursue funding. And as you all know, the state of the infrastructure in these areas are not getting any better. They're getting worse.
And I think we need to keep that in mind as we pursue funding for these. The school system would help with the cost of it also.
And Mr. Moore, just right here for Mr. Moore, I just want to let him know, I don't believe that not one member on this board, not one, do not take our students or our kids at first, at heart. I don't believe that. I don't care what anybody say. I wouldn't believe it. I believe that each of us take our kids' safety first.
I agree.
I couldn't believe that you would say that.
Well, I'm just
I'm
concerned.
gonna be honest with you.
You
I'm
move
gonna be
forward
honest
with
with you.
that.
That was,
I-
I'm just saying this right here from my heart, that I just couldn't, I just couldn't believe that you would say that, Mr. Moore.
Well, it was moving forward. A
Because
motion was
I
made and
do believe
seconded.
that every
So,
one of us take our kids at heart. And we love our kids.
And I just want to remind council, and I know y'all get so tired of me saying this, but it's my job, so I'm going to continue to say it. The stormwater fees are the bulk of what funds the stormwater fund. So when we're talking about these exorbitant costs, unless we were to be benefited with some grants or some partnership funds, we're going to have to figure out a way to pay back some of these loans that would need to be procured in order to do this work. So I just continue to remind everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Terry.
Yes, sir. Mayor, we didn't vote on that last.
We didn't vote on the motion.
Okay, so as I understand, we have a motion and seconded to pursue looking at areas in front of W.H. Robinson, in front of the library, and also on the west side of Railroad Street, the most immediate needs, to try to get some cost estimates together to take a look at what it would take to repair these from a immediate health and safety stance. And we can try to start getting that information together post haste.
I think I heard it, we have the motion and a second for that.
Yes, sir, and if the council,
Any discussion?
I think so,
All
and
in favor, all in favor of that motion?
I'll poll the board,
You handle that.
starting with Mayor Pro Tem Hines,
Yes.
Councilman Moore,
yes.
Councilman Moy,
Yes.
Councilwoman Robertson,
Yes.
and Councilman Smith. Yes. I believe we have votes all in favor of pursuing
Thank you.
the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, board members.
Terry, if I could add one thing briefly
Sure.
about the railroad, I just want to let you know that staff has reviewed the fact that the railroad has a lot of impervious area. This historically has never been billed in the stormwater fund, and wanted to share that if we included that, it could be a substantial change in our revenue stream.
And Anthony, if I understand you correctly, you'd be talking about billing the railroad for the impervious surface?
Yes, in fact, all the rock that is underneath the railroad bed is considered impervious surface.
How much money are you talking, Anthony?
About $808 a month is our preliminary estimate.
Say that again?
About $808 a month.
Let's give them a chance to help us with the railroad with that project, and then after they say no, let's charge them.
Appreciate that, Anthony. Hadn't even thought about that.
Yep, it's okay. I had that information and we had kind of batted around, but given the conversation tonight, I felt like now was a prudent time to bring it up.
Absolutely.
And you said about $800 a month,
Yes, sir.
about $10,000 a year, give or take a little.
Well, I just read an article today that Duke Power lost the battle. And they're gonna have to return some of the money. I sent everyone back. We're gonna get our 25% back on this project, what we paid in, Ms. Parker.
I have to make sure that, I don't want to quote any numbers, but I'll definitely,
The court said, and Winston-Salem said that they're gonna have to give back, or 25%.
I will check into that and,
Yep, that
and
might help with the project.
report back to council. I'm sorry?
See if we can get our 25%.
Right, exactly. Okay, folks, what else do you have on your mind this evening?
I remember, and I don't know, I guess this would be the time to express this. A couple of years ago, Josh Walton served as an intern with the town of Winterville. Did he serve as far as his college, or did the town underwrite that?
The town hired him. It wasn't affiliated directly with his school.
I thought that that was a good program, and we've got the school of, we've got students that are studying to work for public government or government school. Could we think of a project like that again, and offer an internship to a college student who was pursuing the same kind of education?
We currently have interns in Parks and Recreation. With Parks and Recreation, we have a planning intern who is pursuing her urban planning degree. And we currently have a high school student with South Central trying to do a little bit of interning to help me out until I can get an executive assistant. So I think we're trying to utilize intern possibilities wherever possible. We have been contacted by, I've been contacted by an MPA student and someone, I believe it was a social works student, undergrad student, about internship possibilities. Unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to offer those to everyone who's interested, but we certainly do try to utilize those whenever we can. We also have utilized interns in the police department whenever we can, working through ECU, and I don't know if I've left anybody else out, but we do try to utilize internship possibilities whenever we can.
Okay. Well, I was not aware of those, so thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Oh, Mayor, we have a motion to adjourn, made by Councilman Moore, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Hines. Before
All in favor of the motion?
Before I poll the board, is the council interested in another night? Do you feel like you got what you needed from this meeting? I just want to make sure you all leave feeling satisfied. Right.
Yes.
I'm fine.
Everybody good? Okay, well then, with that said, I'll poll the board on the motion to adjourn, starting with Mayor Pro Tem Hines.
Yes.
Councilman Moore.
Yes.
Councilman Moy.
Yes.
Councilwoman Robertson.
Yes.
And Councilman Smith.
Yes.
I'd like to thank staff for all their hard work and preparation. Don, thank you for getting the meal together. Mayor Pro Tem Hines.
Thank you.
And Chief Wilhite, thank you for the food deliveries. With that said, everyone have a wonderful evening.